My name is David Pope. I'm a teaching fellow here at UCL. I teach and convene a course entitled Modern Advocacy and Classical Rhetoric on the LLM programme at UCL Laws. But I've also been a practicing barrister here in London for over 20 years. Well, as the name suggests, the course is about advocacy in modern litigation, essentially modern dispute resolution, and about classical rhetoric. So the advocacy bit is essentially about persuasion by lawyers on behalf of their clients. And of course I'm a barrister, so I guess the principal focus is on courtroom advocacy, courtroom persuasion, but we also look at advocacy in a much broader sense. So written advocacy, advocacy in correspondence between lawyers, advocacy in mediations, that sort of thing. So that's the advocacy side of the course, if you like. The classical rhetoric side of the course, well, classical rhetoric, as I'm sure some of the students will know very well, is the systems of teaching oratory that the ancient Greeks and ancient Romans developed from about the 4th century, 5th century BC. And some of the great figures of antiquity wrote about rhetoric, were interested about rhetoric, and we can still read what they say. And so the idea is we take some of those basic principles of what they taught and we apply them to what lawyers do today. And so it turns out that you can actually do quite a lot with it, and in fact I've done quite a lot of work with classical rhetoric and used it in my practice at the bar. So it's a half course. I have in the past taught it in term 2. I teach over 10 seminars, each around 2 hours long. It's mostly a lecture by me, but I like to make the lectures as interactive as possible. I find that students enjoy the involvement a great deal more if I can do that. And so what we will tend to do pretty much in every lecture or seminar is we will look at least one example of advocacy, whether it's a Cicero speech, so there's one we look at in particular when he was appearing in front of Julius Caesar. We look at modern advocates, both written advocacy and also some videos which we can now access relatively easily in this country and see what they do in court. In another example, in another class, we will look at an advertisement, and see how modern advertisers try to persuade people to buy their goods and services, because of course advertising is a very potent form of persuasion. Well, this course would be of interest, I suspect, to quite a wide number. It certainly has in the past been interesting to a wide number and variety of students. So I've had students who have already practiced for many years as advocates in jurisdictions around the world. I've had plenty of students who have wanted to become advocates in different jurisdictions around the world. But equally, I've had plenty of students who have not really wanted to become advocates, some even not particularly wanted to become lawyers. But they were interested in taking the course because they thought it looked a bit interesting, looked a bit different from most of the courses that they would take when they're doing their LLMs at UCL. And by and large, I think I tend to attract I very much have enjoyed teaching the students who I've had. They tend to be quite an interesting, articulate bunch, as you might imagine from the subject matter of the course. For some students, I suspect they do this course because they want to become advocates and they think, and I hope it is, interesting and useful for them. Certainly the feedback I've had from several students who have gone on to become advocates is that it has been useful for them in their practices. As I said before, I think some students will take this course just because it's of interest to them, whether to become lawyers or otherwise. And some have actually told me that even if they are not wanting to become advocates, that being able to talk about the course, because it's that little bit different, in the course of the interviews that they do for jobs, whether at the bar or elsewhere, has been a useful thing for them to be able to do. I think the course does prepare students for future careers, at least to some extent. It's a mix of theory and practice is the idea. So we look at the theory of persuasion, of classical rhetoric, but we also look at how you can apply that practically. And so I was a law student many years ago, and I have been amazed in the years since that you study various subjects at law, but one of the subjects that you don't study is persuasion, even though as a lawyer you spend a great deal of your time trying to persuade people. And so I hope that some of the principles that my students learn in my course will be of general application to them in whatever career they decide to follow.